move on. So I'm Hannah Oden. I'm a planning coordinator with PAG. So I'm going to go to Ben Elias. Just feel free to unmute yourself and just brief introduction.
Hey everyone, Ben Elias, City of Tucson, Department of Transportation and Mobility.
Great, thank you, Ben. Dan Gabio.
Gabio, community planner with Federal Highways.
So thank you, Dan. Let's give the non-PAG folks. Nalo.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nalo. I'm the Public Works Director for the town of Sarita.
Thank you, Nalo. Jennifer Hobart.
Jennifer Hobart with the ADOT MPD section as the Southern Regional Planner.
Awesome. Welcome, Jennifer. So things are bouncing around a little on my end. Jonathan Crow.
Hi, everybody. Jonathan Crow here with Pima County Department of Transportation.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. And then Mesa.
Mesa Hanna, Deputy State Engineer, ADOT.
Awesome, thank you. Natalie.
Hello, I'm Natalie Shep. I'm with the Pima County Department of Environmental Quality.
Thanks, Natalie. Monica.
Hi, good afternoon. Monica with the City of Tucson DTM. Thank you.
All right, thanks for joining us, Monica. Patrick.
Good afternoon, Patrick Hartley, Department of Transportation and Mobility, City of Tucson Planning Division.
All right, thanks, Patrick. And then Paul Casertano.
Hi, everybody. Paul Casertano, Pima County DOT.
And then Rhett Crown and Shield.
Hey, everybody. Rhett Crown and Shield, City of Tucson, Department of Transportation and Mobility.
Thanks, Rhett. Dan Grossman.
Dan Grossman, Town of Marana, Capital Improvement Program, CIP Division.
All right, thanks, Dan. I think, is there any non-PAG folks that I missed? Oh, yes, Mesa? Looks like your hand is up.
Oh, I think because Mesa sent me the invitation late, it read my name as Mesa, but I'm Megan. I'm the programmer for the PAG region with ADOT.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Megan. And what's your last name?
Bell.
Megan Bell. Okay, awesome. Thanks for joining. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the PAG folks. So Jeanette.
Good afternoon. This is Jeanette DeRen, Transportation Planning Director with PAG.
Thanks, Jeanette. David Zinda.
Hello, David, here at PAG.
Awesome. Dustin?
Hi, everyone. Dustin Fitzpatrick, Environmental Planning Administrator at PAG.
Thanks, Dustin. James Tokishi.
James Tokishi, Transportation Data Science Coordinator here at PAG.
Okay, thanks, James. Melanie Lawson.
Hi, Melanie Lawson, Public Relations at PAG.
Thanks, Melanie. And Yunmi.
Hi, I'm Yumi, a Transportation Data Science Coordinator at PAG.
All right, thanks, Yumi. I'm just gonna recognize we have our admin folks and IT people who are helping us keep this meeting running. So they're gonna keep everything going smoothly for us. So we have Don Garcia, Jesse McCrae, Jeff Hildebrand, Bree Hoishman, and then Isa is also on as well. So I want to thank them for making sure everything runs smoothly and making sure that we are all connected and can assist with any technical difficulties. All right, was there anyone that I missed for introductions? All right, so I think we can move on to the next agenda item, and I'll just briefly say if for any reason you have to leave early or hop off, if you would just let us know, that would be appreciated just to make sure that we maintain quorum for the meeting. All right, so next I am just going to briefly go over the in-kind form. So regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. PAG collects data on the time dedicated to meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. So if you are paid with federal dollars, please let us know. Time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and meeting materials. At the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. Time spent working on PAG, RT initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. All right, so we're going to move on to the next agenda item. So this agenda item is for a survey update that closed last month for the RMAP. So I'm going to turn this over to Melanie Lawson to provide a brief update now that we've had a little more time to look at and evaluate the data and the responses.
All right, perfect. There we go. Okay. So thank you again for your time today. We're going to share some of the results from our recent long-range transportation survey with you. This is very just raw data at this point, so we're working on a few additional items, but the results will help inform our next phase of outreach as well. So as we may have reported earlier, we were just shy of 4,500 participants. The survey was open for a 6-week period. It opened on June 8th and closed on July 18th. So it was a little tricky during the summer to reach some people, but it was still, we were really happy with nearly getting 4,500 people. The survey was promoted region-wide. It was available in both English and Spanish, and we also worked with the vendor to create an accessible version that worked with screen reading devices. And the survey was also available you could take it on the web or on a mobile device. Many users did opt to take it on their computer. About 20% completed on a mobile device and 80% on their computer. So we did ask participants about their transportation priorities. So the most popular transportation priority among participants was to improve roadway conditions. 1,303 participants ranked this as their top priority. The same category was also the second most popular priority. 700 participants marked it as their second priority, and it was also the third top priority, and so it was most common with 663 participants. The second most common top priority was to reduce crosstown travel time. The third most common was road and intersection safety, followed by reducing traffic congestion. And the least common top priority was improve access to jobs. So again, to summarize all of that, the top priorities were improve roadway conditions, reduce crosstown travel time, and improve road and intersection safety. So we also asked participants to help set the regional budget. So users could apply dollar amounts in $1 and $10 increments up to $100 among the areas. So similar to the previous question, where participants want to prioritize spending is first on improving existing roads, second on safety improvements, and third on reducing congestion. We also asked about travel patterns and asked participants how they usually travel, asked them to select which mode they used most frequently during the past week. So you'll see from the graph that most people did select automobile. 3,295 people selected automobile as the mode that they use most often, followed by bicycle, which was 234 participants, and then transit and walking, and a few with personal mobility device. So we also asked participants about how frequently they use transit. So of those who answered this question, 2,441 say that they rarely or never use transit. 315 did say that they use transit daily. Just also wanted to mention that we did have posters that were advertising the survey on the bus, and several in-person outreach locations were also along transit stops. So we did try to make extra attempts to just make sure that the survey was available to transit users. We also asked participants about vehicle ownership. So the most popular answer received was 2 vehicles per household. We also asked about electric vehicles. For this question, the most popular answer was 0, but we do have some with 1 and a couple with 2. And then the last slide I have here has some of the tables with the demographic information. So the demographic questions were at the end of the survey. They were optional, and not every survey participant chose to respond to these questions. But you'll see for annual household income, we did get a decent distribution. For racial demographics, it was a little light on Hispanic or Latino when compared to like census data for the Tucson area. And then for age demographic, you'll see there were very few that were 20 or younger. And this information is useful because it can help inform our next phase of outreach. So we're planning some focus groups and some other targeted outreach once the project list is final. And then we can target some groups and demographics. For example, we can target some Hispanic organizations and some student groups, or some others, to make sure that those that didn't have as much representation in this survey still have an opportunity to provide feedback. So those are all the slides I have. I don't know, Jeanette and Hannah, if we want to take questions or.
Yes, absolutely. We could take questions if you have any. Melanie, as she mentioned early in her presentation, this is kind of like just our first cut at diving into the data that we got from the survey because it was pretty robust. But overall, we're pretty satisfied with our participation. Part of the outreach for the survey, it wasn't just distributed electronically. I think Melanie kind of hit upon it a little bit, but we did also go out to some specific neighborhood events and organizational events to make sure that we did provide the opportunity for specific groups. A good example is the Pima Council on Aging. We went to a few of their senior lunch programs and some other events that they put on just to make sure that we were able to reach some folks that probably don't use the internet often, or maybe not as connected as other groups. So that's just an example. And we do plan on reaching out to, as Melanie said, some of these other areas of these other groups that we didn't necessarily get really great survey responses from.
I can click back to any slides as needed too if you want to look at a couple of graphs in a little more detail.
Okay, thanks, Melanie. If any questions, just feel free to raise your hand, or you can just unmute yourself and you can go ahead and ask your question. Oh, Patrick, go ahead.
Since this is kind of so skewed towards certain demographics, I think 2/3 are over 50 years old, 2/3 I self-identify as white. Is there any effort going to be made to maybe evaluate within each of those kind of demographic slices to see if the distribution of responses is different among younger respondents or lower income respondents? And question 2, do you have a geographic distribution of these responses as well to see if it kind of reflects the makeup across the jurisdictions or within census groups, lot groups, or however, zip codes?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. That's some of the additional analysis that we are working on, is trying to tie, exactly like you mentioned, what specific demographics are maybe using transit, or, did certain 66 or older all reply that automobile is their most frequently used of transportation. So that's some of the more in-depth analysis that we're going to do with some of this data. And then I've seen a heat map, so I think we're working on that too to see exactly the distribution across the region, to make sure that there is good representation from across the region. So that's some of the information we are going to work on.
And Melanie, I don't know if you know the number right off the top of your head, but do you know what percentage of the survey respondents filled out the demographic information? I know there was quite a big percentage that decided not to self-identify.
I have numbers. Let me just do some quick math here. Yeah, it was about 75%, give or take, filled out the demographic information. So about 25% chose to skip these questions.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions?
Melanie, could you go back to the priority slide? I think that was one of your first.
Yes.
And under reduce traffic congestion, was there some lead in or explanation to that as a category in the survey results? What that would look like?
I'd have to go back and get the specific wording, but I believe that you could click on an information icon and there was a short explanation of what each of these meant. I don't have that specific wording in front of me, but we can go back and get that.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions?
All right. I am not seeing any other hands up. So if there's nothing else, we can move on. We have, again, this presentation will be posted online. And of course, the meeting recording will be available as well. So if anything comes to mind from anyone, oh, sorry, Paul, I see your hands up.
Yes, sorry to cut you off there. Just want to make it, I want to kind of get some clarity around. So Melanie, you had mentioned that you're going to use this information to kind of shape the next round of interface with the public. I think you mentioned it as, inform the next phase of outreach. And so I guess thinking about where we are in the development of the plan, the prioritization or selection of project investments. So we have a sense, at least, of the transportation priorities. They don't necessarily appear to be aligned with the goals necessarily in the RMAP, but gives a little bit of a better sense in terms of, roadway condition being pretty up there, which is to be expected. So will there be any use of this round or future rounds in readjusting or modifying the selected and funded projects that are in plan, or are that ship has kind of sailed and this is kind of just to inform the public sentiment on the long range plan? I'm trying to get a better feel for what are we going to do with this when it comes down to shaping the plan itself, especially considering that the draft project list is pretty much wrapping up. So I'm trying to get a sense of how that timing will work and if there's an opportunity for the public to have input on what's being funded in the plan, or is that not really what's intended here?
Yeah, I think Hannah or Jeanette, do you have a better inclination or thoughts on how this is going to impact or not impact the project list?
Sure, I can take a stab at that. Well, it already has to some degree. Hannah and I took a close look at these initial findings from the survey when we were making some recommendations in the project list. So we did want to make sure that some of the top priorities that we were seeing are adequately reflected in in this plan. But in terms of reaching out to the groups that we don't know if they've participated or not, but it appears by those who have self-identified that they might not have been well represented. Those groups, we are going to take the plan to, and what we hope to do is have the project list to show them so that we can answer their questions and make sure that if there's something that's a priority to them, that we can demonstrate that it's in the plan and that there's sufficient funding for whatever it is that they might identify as their priority. Those meetings are going to be a little bit different. We're not going to sit down with those groups and say, hey, fill out our survey and go through this like we did in our previous round. It is going to be more on the, hey, let's sit, have a conversation, let us walk you through our plan and what we foresee the outcomes to be, and make sure that those things are aligned. So if we were to see some sort of drastic miss the mark on the project list, then yeah, we would bring a recommendation back to TPC. We don't think that we'll hit that because, in working with you guys over the past month, we've done our best to make sure that we've kind of caught everything in one way, shape, or form, so that, some of the definitely the needs that are going to be met, but even some of the kind of more peculiar, individualized, more specific types of projects can be achieved in the plan. So in terms of like, are we going to add a named project based on what we would hear from the community? I mean, I would say probably not, because, if it were a big, huge priority, we probably would have heard it from you guys first. It would have come out either in your general plans or in, your transportation master plans. But if there is opportunity to do that, we would be working directly with, the jurisdiction that would have to sponsor that type of project. But really it is just more of a opportunity to sit with those groups, inform them what the plan is. We saw a lot of comments in the survey process where individuals would email us directly after the survey. So not necessarily as part of the survey, but because there was a link to how to, provide additional feedback. And, we got some of those comments, and, it really was a matter of looking at what folks were saying and looking at the list and saying, yeah, it looks like their concern is able to be addressed in what we have here so far. So I hope that answers your question.
So quick follow-up to that, I guess. Seeing that the in-plan list has, it looks like there's some significant adjustments, and they appear to be the staff selections that may have been informed by this public outreach. I don't know what your presentation that you might have in mind for later in this session, but are you going to be able to speak to what kind of adjustments were made and whether or not they related to input that you received, or is it just,
yep,
I guess we'll wait till
yeah. Yeah, so on this agenda we're going to go over the project list. So we'll have a presentation on some of the funding as well as diving into the project list, and we can walk you through some of those changes that were made. I will say that most of them weren't where most of the changes where you see like a categorical item go up, a lot of that was mainly because we merged different categoricals together. So you'll see some of that where those numbers look a lot bigger than they used to be in the last plan. A lot of that was from merging different line items, and then yes, as well as putting some additional dollars towards specific things. Those weren't always just a staff recommendation. That wasn't just like my brainchild, throw some money there. There was a lot of that discussion that happened one-on-one with the jurisdictions where we were hearing, hey, this is a priority for our jurisdiction. Is that reflected in the plan? Is there enough money there? So in circumstances where we had a line item that was, let's say, a transit amenity line, and we had another jurisdiction say, yeah, we want to do some bus stops and signage for transit as well, we would look at that number. Could the original ask from the group plus this new line item, can we put those together and cover the amount? So you'll see a lot of that, and we can speak to most of them on like individual line items. If you have a specific question, like how did this number come about, we could do that. But of course, feel free to reach out anytime and ask us like where did this number come from? Because there obviously are quite a few projects on there to go one by one at this meeting.
All right, I'll look forward to that discussion. Thanks.
All right, you're welcome.
All right, thanks, Paul. Thanks, Jeanette. All right, anything else? That item? One last chance. All right, again, everything will be available online. So if something comes up or any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. All right, so moving on to the next agenda item, which will be the bulk of the discussion for today. So this is the 2055 ArtMap project list. So we're going to discuss kind of where we're at with the tentative draft in plan list. A few lists were sent out on Thursday, which we'll discuss in more detail here in a minute. But I'm actually going to turn it over to David Zinda. We've had some very recent updates to the financial plan. And so I'm just going to turn it over to him for a couple minutes, just provide an overview of where we're at with the fiscal constraint, and that will inform the discussion for the rest of the meeting.
Hello, it's good to be with you all. It doesn't look like my video is popping enough or working, so I'm just going to shut that back off. Okay, so yes, my name's David Zinda. I've been assisting with the financial portion of the RMAP for some time now. And relative to the last time I spoke with you all, we have gotten some revised estimates provided by local jurisdictions, cities and towns for whom you work in county, in terms of how much money you are planning on putting forward for projects of a regional nature that would be included in the RMAP. And pretty much it looks like more or less across the board, those were pared back a little bit. So it did drop our bottom line down. Right now, currently, we are sitting at approximately $16.2 billion in 2024 dollars that we would have to work with. And that is the number that we want to fiscally constrain to, I guess, if I use that phrase correctly. So I don't know that I have anything else really to update other than that. That was basically the only change that I have made to this financial plan. None of the other underlying assumptions that we discussed previously have changed. The only other exception, I suppose, now that I think about it, is previously we had identified specifically $70 million in competitive grant funding for City of Tucson Bus Rapid Transit Project. After collaboration and consultation with ADOT, it seems like that might isn't quite in the spirit of what we would do in this kind of plan, it sounds like. But and Jeanette, correct me if I'm wrong, we're assuming that funding is going to be taken care of in the RTA funding source, but not necessarily as a line item on a competitive grant funding source. So for that reason, we see $70 million shorter there as well in terms of that bottom line figure. But other than that, that's all I have to update with, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thanks, David. And yeah, that change with the grant line item, that was based on a conversation that we had with Dan Gebbio from FHWA, that we can't really identify specific grant funding before we actually have that grant funding in hand. So that's where that reduction came in. And just wanted to thank Dave for all of his hard work. And we were working off of that $17 billion fiscally constrained number as of all the way up until today when David was able to provide these new numbers. So on that note, we are back down to 16.2 as being the number that we're going to use for fiscal constraint. So based on the list that Hannah provided at the end of last week, we are going to have to make some changes because that list was closer to the 17 billion mark. So with that, I'll let Hannah go ahead and share her screen and kind of walk you guys through some of the changes that were made since the last time this group met, as well as some of the thoughts we had, and also take any any questions and thoughts that you guys would like to contribute. It looks like Dan has his hand up, so it's a good person to segue to.
I saw Patrick's first, so Patrick, you can go first if you like, and then I just want to clarify the illustrative projects comment real quick, just for the group.
Great. Well, thank you, Dan. Just had a question. So we had a bit of back and forth previously, kind of trying to identify a local contribution to regional projects, which should have increased the overall pot. Did that ever get reflected into the financial plan? Because we're spending quite a bit of our local revenue on the federal aid network for these improvements. Related to that, we were also talking about the potentially scaling up the general fund contribution as a local contribution to any transit operational dollars to make sure that that's a wash, because that's where that gap's going to likely be covered from, anything that's going to be on the SunTrans system.
Yes, hello, Patrick. I think I'm probably best suited to answer that question. So I did incorporate all the figures that we had discussed when we previously met with you. So that included that general fund contribution designated for transit only, which I assume is constant on a constant dollar basis. So once we start talking about inflation, then and that side of the picture, then we see an increase from year to year. And I have also included whatever else you had instructed and for all other forms of projects as general funding. I can't remember off the top of my head whether that was a net increase or decrease compared to what you had submitted before, but almost every other jurisdiction, to my recollection, who we talked to, either maintained or cut back on their local contribution to the RNet.
Okay, yeah, it should have been a net increase, basically making an assumption about 80% of our local collections will be going to the federal aid network or something along those lines, and some of our local HERF. I wouldn't mind just peeling back the financial plan a little bit to verify that and to see how that was being applied.
Certainly, I'm sure that we could set up a time to meet, and I would defer to Hannah or Jeanette if there would be any other involvement in this forum for me to share or present, however.
Yeah, offline's fine, David.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. And thanks for your question, Patrick. Dan.
Yeah, thank you. So just to clarify, my previous comment was just to ensure that if there are illustrative projects, just to make sure that they're identified. And if, to be an illustrative project, that just means that the project is not fully funded by reasonable expected funds. And so I just provided the definition of that to PAG. So if anyone has any questions on what that is or any specific projects, feel free to reach out to me.
Great, thank you, Dan.
Patrick, did you have another question, or did you just leave your hand up?
Sorry, that was a mistake. It's down.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Any other questions on the financial plan update? All right. Well, if not, and again, if anything does come up, feel free to reach out. So I'm going to move on to discussing the project list. A few were sent out last week, but I'm just going to cover some kind of higher level discussion points before going into the project specific. So want to thank you all for either meeting individually to discuss your agency or jurisdiction's projects, as well as responding to emails as we got everything finalized. So again, there was a list of tentative in-plan projects that were sent last week. And again, this is all in draft form, but those would be projects that count towards the fiscal constraint. There was also a list of aviation projects that do not count towards the fiscal constraint, and reserve projects as well. So those were sent in 3 different lists. We have received, to our knowledge, the most updated cost estimates from jurisdictions. So the lists that were sent out do reflect those. Again, we're still updating everything in the RMAP Project Explorer. So those lists do have the most updated information. Some adjustments were made to transit, and some categoricals were also merged with some jurisdiction-specific projects, if those were covered by a categorical. So proposed funding does reflect any combined costs, and we can go through that with the project list. Just in general, some increases were made to categorical projects based on performance measures. And again, these initial survey results that we were seeing, so that includes increases to safety, transit, and then bike and pedestrian infrastructure. This was mentioned in the email on Thursday, but the reserve list, it's quite long. So so that was cleaned up a little bit. If there were projects that were left in there that were covered by an in-plan categorical or the proposed in-plan categorical, those were removed just to kind of consolidate and clean up that reserve list a little bit. So before I get into the actual list, Jeanette, did you have anything to add?
No, Hannah, I think you pretty much covered it. I guess just to say that the list that Hannah will share, and the list that we shared on Thursday, we do have to cut that back based on information that we got from Dave Zinda today on that fiscally constrained number. So we do appreciate, once again, everybody being so responsive. We were making changes to the Explorer based on emails and conversations that we had with you guys all the way until mid last week. So thanks for being patient and also being responsive. We know it's difficult over the summer months with people's schedules, but we think that we've gotten it pretty far, and of course, we'll be continuing this discussion with you guys as well as with TPC at the TPC meeting on Wednesday of next week. So that's it, Hannah.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Jeanette. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Just change kind of how I'm seeing it on my end. All right. Can everyone see that okay? It's the spreadsheet.
Yes, I can see it.
All right. Awesome. Thanks for confirming, Jeanette. So the first list that I want to discuss, so this is the tentatively in plan list. So these are projects based on conversations with our jurisdictional partners. What would be in the draft in plan project list. Again, that's the projects that count towards the fiscal constraint. So this was sent out Thursday. As Jeanette mentioned, we have made some last minute proposed changes just to meet that new fiscal constraint number. So I'm just going to briefly point out those changes, as well as just some other things, other updates that I want to highlight, just so that everyone is aware of those. So I'm just going to scroll down to the next page, get my note sheet out. So I'm just going to go through these, pretty briefly, and then I'll open it up for questions and discussion, and then I can briefly move on to the other two project lists that were shared. So the first project is this 16503. So this is signalized pedestrian and bike crossings region-wide. So this was increased slightly from 29 million to 35 million, and this was to account for some RTA Next categorical funding, just to make sure that was reflected in the RMAP and the safety and active transportation element. The same was for 194.08. That was the shared use pass region-wide. This was increased from 60 million to 86 million. And again, this was a PAG staff recommendation. And this is all right. Can everyone still hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It looks like my video have either listen or stop, so I'll just turn it off. Hopefully you're not looking at my person face. But glad you can still hear me. So
hey, Hannah, from 86 million, from what was it again? I didn't quite catch that. What was the previous for shared use?
It was 60 million.
Okay, thanks.
All right, and again, that was to account for RTA Next, safety and active transportation, element categorical. And again, this is a recommendation, and again, in draft form, so definitely open for discussion. And then the next project is 43398, pedestrian facilities and sidewalk gaps region wide. So that one, it was, so this was one, it was 334 million in the last RMAP. The list that we sent on Thursday had a recommendation to increase that to 500 million, basically to account for the performance measures and increasing pedestrian safety and facilities, as well as some initial results that we've seen from the survey. But because of that fiscal constraint, the recommendation of 500 million was reduced to 400 million. And the same was on the next project, the bicycle facilities connectivity region wide. So this was 100 million in the last RMAP. The proposal was to increase it to 500, which was 500 million, which is reflected in the list that you saw Thursday. But because to meet the new fiscal constraint number, the recommendation would be to have this at 400 million. The next project is 557.08. This is regionally funded projects, region-wide projects to support local initiatives. So this was formerly a project known as non-regional roadways throughout the region, jurisdictional discretion for local roads. So the project name was updated to be a little more broad, have a little more flexibility. And in the version that was sent on Thursday, the proposed funding was 250 million. This was reduced to 150 million for that fiscal constraint. All right, Patrick, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Do you want comments as we go through these, or do you want us to hold them till the end?
If they're easy to hold to the end, if that's not going to be too much to go back.
I can hold.
Or would you rather, or go ahead if you have something for this. Maybe we can just go through.
Yeah, I would just like to see a specific example of this. I'm trying to think of what the use of the RMAP is, and for us, it's to be able to apply for federal funds, to direct regional funds to local projects. This description is so broad, I can't see it being something that we could justify, being consistent with the long-range plan for, pursuing a federal grant. I guess I don't know what that $150 million is doing in here, and I would recommend removing it and using it for named projects.
Okay. I might defer to Jeanette if you had a specific example.
Sure. I think
this one.
Yeah, this has been that that project number 527, what is it, 52708? Yeah. It is. It's kind of this quirky, like, what do we do with this? So it was, I think, initially in the last RMAP, something in the $2 billion range. And because we pulled out that the local funding out of the fiscal constraint, we wanted, earlier in this group, in the working group, we had discussions about completely wiping this out versus leaving something there. And then if we did leave it there, like how answering that exact same question, Patrick, like, well, to what end? Like, why would we leave this in there? I think where we landed the last week was on, okay, we do have some indication that this is referenced in the tip, like somebody initially tied a project to this. So we maybe not want to wipe it out completely. But the thought here was to kind of address projects that came up, like when Aerospace Parkway was built, where it was all of a sudden it came about. It wasn't initially in the named project list, but it became a regional priority quickly, for that one, I think, was economic development purposes. So
but
yeah,
that was also adding capacity, which should have been modeled for conformity in the RMAP. So it'd be really hard to point to a non-capacity project in which an air quality determination would be necessary if we're adding capacity to the network.
That's right. Yeah. So I mean, I think we're open to any recommendation on this project. There's, been back and forth discussion on it. So
previously it was pavement. I guess I don't think we should change the intent using the existing project ID. And B, that was one of the few pavement projects we actually had in the long range plan, which I think was consistent with the feedback we just heard from the community.
Yeah, and as we discussed at the previous working group meetings and at the TBC meeting, that we're pulling pavement out specifically. And so those numbers, you guys, all the jurisdictions gave us their pavement numbers, and those are going to be shown outside of the project list since that's going to be local funding. So that's why pavement isn't in there specifically.
All right. Paul, looks like you have your hand up.
So that's a significant concern. You know, my thoughts go back to previous federal funding, ARPA and others, where there was federal funding provided for shovel-ready activities, which included pavement. So if any such thing should become available again, we have nothing in the long-range plan to point to utilize those dollars that are outside of our local jurisdictional purview. And then also considering that, you know, roughly a third of ADOT's long-range plan is pavement and maintenance activities. It just doesn't quite jive that there's no reference of pavement investment in the long-range plan. And adding on top of that, this is the number one public concern that we heard as part of your outreach activities. We hear it all the time. For it to not really be reflected in the investments for the long-range plan is really concerning, I guess.
Well, it's not the case, Paul. Pavement is going to be reflected in the long-range plan. It's just not going to be considered part of the fiscally constrained list. So
but it's not exclusive to local investment.
Well, the way we're addressing it is we're showing what the investment is and what we anticipate the investment in pavement to be region-wide. So we've taken all the contributions from all the jurisdictions and we're putting that together, and we're going to show that because you're right. We want to show the community that there is going to be a significant investment in that there is going to be a significant investment in pavement, that we're not saying, okay, yes, we hear you. There's this, we're seeing in the survey results that pavement and roadway condition is important. So we're trying to characterize that investment kind of separately because it is coming from, it is happening. You guys are investing in this, and we're doing it to quite a significant magnitude. You know, specifically, I mean, it would be really, you know, we'd be remiss to not identify the 411 funding that the city is putting towards pavement. That's a big, significant contribution. It is going to make a big impact. So even though that's local funding for local pavement, it does address that issue that we're seeing as a region-wide concern. I think that there's a lot of opportunities where we could say, hey, hopefully there'll be funding in the future from that's made available for all sorts of different things. You know, I think that there's opportunity for the state and the federal government to come up with different types of programs. And in fact, we've seen that since the last long range plan. So, but you
there's
know,
no opportunity to use that funding for us if it's not referenced as such in the long range plan. That's the point I'm trying to make. If it's only referenced as investment of local funding, then any non-local funding that we seek to program for pavement activities would not be an eligible activity.
That would be an easy add though, because we would just add a different type of funding source to the mix.
So is that a RMAP amendment process? And what is the timeline for that nowadays? Because we've heard 9 months, 24 months. I'm not quite sure how long that takes, but it doesn't seem to provide the nimble functionality that we're all desiring, which is a main, you know, major piece of any long range plan is to be able to move quickly if funding comes available for a variety of different transportation investments. If we can't move on federal funding, non-local funding for pavement, I think that's a significant shortcoming of the long range plan.
Thanks, Paul, for your comment. I don't know, Dan, maybe you have a thought on that. I don't know if you know how some of the other regions have addressed that, where we currently don't have funding that's not local funding for pavement. So do you see folks kind of speculatively putting it in there saying, we would really like to see this in the future, so we're going to put it in there in hopes that something like that becomes available? Or have you seen how other folks might add that?
Well, pavement is a little bit tricky because it varies from year to year in priorities, but if it's a priority for PAG to invest in, you could always put in a general pavement program just to highlight and clarify that investment, and then leave the actual project selections later on, year to year, as the priorities change through the tip. But it's up to PAG how to do that. But certainly helps when considering performance measures and asset management to reflect the investment and the long range plan and the tip.
That sounds great. Thanks, Dan. And I guess, Paul, that maybe answers your question. I mean, we could perhaps show it that way. You're on mute. Sorry. We see you talking, but
Sorry, I think
there you
there's a significant disconnect with the goals that are identified in the long range plan. I know that previous numbers for pavement investment in the RMAP were targeted toward the goal of having 20% or less of the federal aid network in poor or failed condition. And that number, this was 10 years ago or more, was in the ballpark of $3.5 billion on the federal aid network alone for a 20-year horizon. We're now looking at a 30-year horizon. We're 10 years in the future, and our pavement investment is restricted to local investment only and doesn't really align with the target that we've said to the public. That's how we would like to maintain our pavement condition. I understand the limitation on the revenues for sure, but I don't want to cut ourselves off at the knees by not having a specific listed project in the long range plan that would then inadvertently or unintentionally prevent us from using any future non-local funding that becomes available for pavement. That's really the big thing for me.
Great. Thanks, Paul. I mean, if you'd like to make that as I will note that as an official recommendation from the working group, but if you'd like to make that as a recommendation, that we can definitely bring that forward next week when we bring the whole list to the TPC.
I'm sure it'll get discussion at TPC, just by nature of the pavement investment levels that are happening at the jurisdictional level. I think the more flexibility and opportunity to get to funding that we can provide, the better. I think the DOT directors will certainly reinforce that approach.
Can I just piggyback on Paul's comments here? I know that to a certain extent we're comparing apples and oranges here, but just looking to see how other communities might approach programs or planning like this. MAG in their 2050 long range plan has 500 million exclusively dedicated to arterial rehabilitation, so that pavement pres piece across the region, we've already heard it in our survey results. We've heard it from our jurisdictions. We hear it from other communities that are not too dissimilar from our own. So really, wondering where that disconnect comes from.
Yeah. And I think that I don't know that there's a big disconnect, because we're not, I guess it's hard to see in this project list that, we're not identifying out the pavement funding right now. But yeah, I mean, I think we hear what you're saying, and if we want, we can add a pavement or I don't know if you want to call it arterial reconstruction, but we could show it as a program and a placeholder for if we were to get a funding source. Okay, so I guess that's a comment and a recommendation we can take forward to TPC. Hannah, I'll let you continue on down your list.
All right, thanks for that. Yeah, thanks for the discussion. So yeah, that's noted, and yeah, we can certainly have that as a recommendation. So I'm just going to move on down the list. Yeah, and I guess it'd probably be productive. Yeah, if anything comes up as I'm moving down the project list, feel free to ask questions, and we can just go through them as they come up. So the next project is 24.18. So it's regional freight improvements. And so this one, when it was sent on Thursday, the number was a little higher. I think it may have been 50 million. I failed to write that in my notes specifically. But yeah, again, because of the fiscal constraint, that was dropped back down to 10, which was what it was in the previous RMAP. So that was one change since Thursday. And then the next project, 63.18, that's all weather access improvements region-wide. So this was one that we had discussed with some of our jurisdictional representatives that this was a need. So it was previously 30 million. So just based on discussions with other jurisdictions, again, there were some jurisdictional projects that were incorporated into this larger categorical. So this was one that was increased from 30 to 75 million. So that was reflected in the list on Thursday, but did want to just note that change during the meeting. The next one is 54108, so that's alternative energy and fuel vehicle infrastructure. So this was one, it was the same as what was sent out on Thursday. It was previously 7 million, but the recommendation would be to increase this amount and based on EV charging infrastructure costs. So this shows about $2 million a year of investment. And so it was increased to 60 million over 30 years.
This also reflects some comments that we heard directly from our one-on-one meetings with you guys.
Yes, thanks, Jeanette. All right, and the next one is 20.18. So this is multimodal mobility and safety enhancements region-wide. So let me just make sure I'm referencing the right list here. So this was previously, in the last RMAP was only 30 million, just based on our performance measures for safety. And again, what we've been hearing from the community about safety on our roadways. The recommendation was to increase this to 375 million. This also included some jurisdictional categoricals that were lumped in here or included in this categorical, but the cost was still increased. So when it was sent out on Thursday, the recommendation was 375 million, but to reach the new fiscal constraint number, the recommendation would be to have this at 325 million. So again, in the previous RMAP, it was 30 million, and it does include, was combined with some jurisdictional specific projects, so that the cost does reflect that combined funding. Okay, so 20298. Oh, sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
Oh, good, thanks. Hey, I just wanted to ask a question. Maybe this would be for ADOT and the Federal Highways representatives. But many of our projects that we're going to be pursuing in the next 5-10 years are probably going to be falling into that 20.18 category. And I just want to make sure that that's kind of at a level of specificity and description that if we were to come for a discretionary grant program for doing a complete streets project, we could point to this item and feel comfortable about it. We're not adding a lot of capacity on our system.
All right. Yeah, Mesa.
Just confirming here. I'm sorry, I cannot see the spreadsheet clearly, but quick question. Maybe this is the time for it, or maybe in a later time. The Kino Country Club TIs, as you know, came back from bidding, way higher. And I know that the TIP had 603 million for this project. Am I correct here? And that was an amendment, and the amendment was approved by PAG. Is that correct?
That was in the TIP.
Has the TIP been approved?
The TIP was approved by the regional council, subject to finishing up some air quality conformity work that we're doing with FHWA and the EPA. So we met with them last week to finalize some of those details for the air quality side, but we believe it should be approved really soon. But in terms of it has gone through our regional council, and we've been approved to kind of wrap up those last items with FHWA and EPA.
Yeah, and the reason I'm asking, because we have the State Transportation Board coming up on Friday. So we want to make sure, because at the PPAC, it was approved, the contingent upon PAG's approval to the revised TIP. So I want to make sure that we are addressing those steps appropriately and giving FHWA the chance to review this at the same time.
Sure. Yeah. And that's a good comment, Misa, and probably one maybe to take offline from this conversation, because the TIP is kind of a different item from the long range plan. But yeah, we hear you with your meeting coming up. We could set you up with a conversation, probably best with Jamie Brown on our team, to talk about the status of the TIP. I hate to speak to the TIP because it's not my project, but
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And I see Dan has got his hand up. I don't know if he wanted to chime in about this, but I'm happy to get Jamie Brown in touch with you this afternoon and see if he can answer your questions on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify Mesa's question real quick and then go back to Patrick. So Mesa, were you talking about the I-10 Country Club project specifically?
Yes.
Yeah, that was approved. So we handled that through an administrative amendment since it didn't exceed the 25% increase. So that's not subject to conformity.
Okay.
So that is good to go. As Jeanette mentioned, the rest of the 25 through 29 TIP is still going through the conformity approval process.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. And then back to Patrick for that number 20.18. Do projects need to be listed in here in order to go after grants? It depends on each grant, but my understanding for the majority of federal highways grants, typically the projects don't need to be included in a long-range plan for you to be eligible to apply. Sometimes various criteria are included so that by including a project in an approved plan, you may get some competitive advantage. But it's grant by grant how the criteria is set up. So if you have any specific projects of interest, you could reach out to PAG to see if those could be included. And just as a reminder, if those projects are not funded fully through the city, then they would need to be shown in here as an illustrative project.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And maybe a better question then would be a bit for Peg. So if we were to come with a complete streets project that were, say, awarded grant funding, because of this item here, we wouldn't necessarily have to go through a full RMAP amendment, and we could point to 20.18 for a named complete streets project in the TIP to access those federal funds.
Yes, yes. And we've actually done that with a few projects that have come through. I don't know if that we tied them exactly to 2018, but we've had a few come through where they were more location specific projects that we did tie to a categorical item. And I think, you know, this was one, you know, because of that dollar amount, the 325 million, we anticipate those types of projects to come through under this ID number.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeanette.
You're welcome. It's similar to, you know, the categoricals in here that are going to include RTA Next funding, where the RTA Next might not necessarily list all the projects that'll receive that type of funding. You know, those specific decisions will be made at that time, but then they'll be reflected under those categoricals in the long range plan. Okay, Maisa, I see you still have your hand up. Did you have another question or?
Oh, no, I forgot my hand up.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure before we continue.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thanks everyone. So there's nothing else on that one. I'll move on to 202.98. So that's bridge rehabilitation region wide. So this was expanded to include the construction of replacing bridges, so maintenance, deck repair, and barrier walls. Those were added based on conversations with our representatives. This is also removed or combined with a Pima County bridge categorical for replacement bridges. And this was the same funding amount, the same proposed funding amount that was sent on Thursday. I just wanted to point out that that was increased from 75 million to 250 million. The next one is 365.98. So that was street lighting region wide. So for this one, this stayed the same as the list that was sent out on Thursday. The recommendation would be to just increase this slightly from 17 to 200 million to account for the safety and active transportation element currently in the works for RTA Next. Previously, there was also reference to arterial street lighting, so we did remove that. So it wouldn't just be specific to arterial roadways. The next one was 218.23. This was transit-specific infrastructure region-wide. So this was requested by our partners at SunTran to be added at a cost of $1.5 million. Our recommendation would be to increase this to 15 million over the course of the plan, just to account for bus turnarounds, pedestrian connections, and signalizations in the project description. All right, and next, 532.08. So it's high capacity transit enhancements. So this is one that as PAC staff we recommend adding because it's consistent with the regional long range transit plan. So this is the same. Sorry, losing my spot here. So this was the same amount, the 10 million that was shared on Thursday. So no changes there regarding the fiscal constraint. The next project is 635.08. That's transit operations and maintenance. So for this one, this was one that PAC staff recommends adding to address the transit-related performance measures and also to allow for expansion of service in addition to the fixed routes that was included in another project. Sorry, Patrick, do you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering if you could explain the difference between this item at 500 million, I think you were going there, and then 566.08, which is expand the fixed route bus system and increase service area and frequency for another $1 billion.
Yeah, so for this one, the 635.08, the idea for this one, and I believe it was previously a reserve project, potentially funded at over $1 billion. But this would be transit operations and expansion in addition to that fixed route. So it could be Dial-A-Ride, Sun Shuttle, microtransit, those type of additional services.
It's essentially the O&M for any expanded network.
Okay, so that would be above and beyond anything that's identified in RTA next. I guess where would the funding identified within the financial constraint be for this 500 million? Because I think in RTA next, there was 600 million for system-wide everything, and that gets us through most of the horizon of this plan.
I think this was just calculated as the O&M if those expansions do come through. And Hannah, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we did have a conversation on this one with DaVita at Suntran.
This one I'm not 100% sure, but if there's anyone on the call from Suntran knows thoughts on this one, would love to hear it.
This one's also multiple, whereas the other one's Tucson sponsored.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my recommendation would be, unless there's absolute certainty what the distinction is between the two projects, $500 million is an awful lot to tie up away from named projects, especially with this tightened fiscal constraint.
Okay.
And if that means making that transit, the Tucson Transit project, the regional one, and capping that at the $1 billion to kind of address the same need, unless we can show what that 500 million is doing and that it's within kind of the transit restricted funds.
Okay. All right, thanks for that, Patrick. Yeah, and we can circle back with Preston here at RTA Transit and someone from the Suntran folks and make sure that the recommendations align with what the cost might be.
Absolutely. All right, thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Jeanette. So I'll just move on to the next one. So this is commuter programs for alternative transportation. So this is one. The project title was updated to be separate from incentives. But it could include programs, incentive type programs, just depending on the funding source or other programs. So previously, e-bike incentives were discussed. Again, depending on the funding source, this could cover that. The funding remained the same as the Lost RMAP at $5 million. But again, the title was changed for commuter programs, so alternative transportation, region-wide programs aimed at changing the behavior of drive-alone commuters. And Patrick, I see you still have your hand up. I don't know if that was from a previous question.
Usually is, sorry.
No worries. Thanks. Okay, and then just the last one I wanted to point out, yes, thanks for your patience as I go through these, was a regional contingency. So it was economic and inflationary contingency. So this is one that basically counts as, project costs, are increasing. So this would account for any, potential increase to projects or any increased cost to projects. So when the list was sent out Thursday, the recommendation was to have it at 200 million. It was reduced to 100 million for the fiscal constraint. Jeanette, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add for that one specifically.
Not really. I think the thought behind this project was, this dollar amount was that, if we were to have a situation where we have a project listed here in the RMAP in-plan project list and it were to come in over over the amount. This would help us to avoid having to go through an RMAP amendment just because the cost went in. It kind of provides a little bit of cushion for that. We've seen, gosh, in the past year, more than the past year, but specifically in the past year, we've seen some really, really high costs come in on projects, or as the projects continue on, the costs have gone up drastically. So this would kind of allow us to continue to use that RMAP ID if the cost did go significantly higher than what was initially in plan.
All right, thanks, Jeanette. So that was everything else on this list, was reflected on what was sent out Thursday. So hopefully we had a little time to review. There was a duplicate Pima County project that we were notified of. So that was removed from here, and the correct one was retained and will be retained on the list. So the total cost of all these projects is about 16.19 billion. So that's just below the anticipated fiscal constraint. So while we're still on this tentatively in plan list, I'll open it up for any additional thoughts, questions. If there's anything that you noticed for your own jurisdiction or agency as you were going through the list that was inaccurate, definitely let us know. Again, we're updating everything in the Project Explorer, so certainly by make any changes, any desired changes for specific jurisdictional projects in there. So if there's any other additional thoughts, I know we've discussed a couple of recommendations already, but all right, Dan.
Thanks, Hannah. So just a reminder that if there are any regionally significant projects that are not listed here, when you get to the part where you have a draft ready to actually share, it'd be nice to highlight those. And then I think David addressed this comment already, but if there are any other illustrative projects that come up that need to be added, just to make sure that those are clearly marked as illustrative. And that's it for me.
All right, thanks, Dan. All right, anything? Go ahead, Patrick.
Sorry, I don't mean to dominate, but if nobody else is going to step in here.
No, please.
I would like to see or kind of pull back the paper a little bit on the debt service as well. I'm trying to get a sense of where that would be coming from. Since we're taking the local contribution out of this plan, I think very little debt service is happening at a regional level, and we should probably just align that with what's in the RTA next plan and maybe a little bit of capacity for the RTA third plan. But 520 is a pretty big number, again, like the 500 we were seeing in transit, to be taken off a named projects. I know we've got local funds that we're using to service our current debt, but typically we aren't using 12.6 or federal funds or anything else that would be tied up in this plan to do debt service beyond the RTA, which is already being identified in the RTA next plan.
I would support that. It looks like if you applied the approach being taken with RTA Next, there's a potential savings of $420 million here that could be used for other projects. I don't think the 520 is necessary, nor is it the current approach to the regional projects that this debt is supposed to be serving.
Yeah, we'd have to factor in the debt service on the current RTA, 20 years of debt service in the RTA Next, plus an additional 10 on the last 10 years. Well, it would be the RTA 3, if you will. Hard to think about an RTA 3 already. Yeah. So yeah, we anticipate this number being discussed. Jonathan had reached out with the same comment. And it's 520 is a big number. It amounts to about 17 million and change a year. But yeah, it's definitely a number that we can think through a little more if that's the pleasure of the group.
Yeah, I think it's a general kind of way to review this. Maybe we should look at what each of these kind of categories of funding is achieving in terms of what our performance-based planning would indicate is necessary to apply an appropriate amount so we can open up more funding for some named regionally significant projects. Because we're really squeezing the named projects with this tighter fiscal constraint and a lot of the money getting tied up in these categoricals.
Okay. Fair enough. I think that's a comment that we're hearing from you. It hasn't really been a comment that we've heard from most of the jurisdictions. It seems like that their regionally significant projects that they wanted on the in-plan project list are in here. So if there's specific projects that are not on the in-plan list that you want us to accommodate for whatever reason, we can definitely take a look at those as well and see if, if they aren't fitting a categorical in some way, shape, or form, if we could identify what some of those projects might be that are critical to the jurisdictions to get on the list, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I've got a list ready. I won't bore the full committee with them, but I'd be happy to chat with you offline.
Yeah, absolutely. Send that over.
I think we could look at the same at 556.08, 400 million bikeways. We've got that kind of tied up in the Complete Streets project. We've got it tied up in the Shared Use Paths project. We've got it. So, I guess what does 400 million buy us? And we can revisit some of those numbers just to create some more funding capacity across the board.
Great. Yeah, get that over to us and we can take a look at it. And probably, I'll have Hannah reach out to you after this meeting and try to set up a time for us to talk about that. If you and Ben have time this week, that'd be good.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll focus more on our capacity projects because I think that 20.28 or 20.18 gets most of our non-capacity projects.
I think we'll need to make the same arrangement for Pima County as well. I know there are some projects of ours that have been put back into reserve that likely need to be in the plan. So we need to find capacity to do that. I think the bond debt service is a big place for capacity. I think there's other opportunities as well.
Right. Well, should we set something up with you, Paul, or Jonathan?
I would say work through Jonathan and he'll pull me and Catherine in as necessary, but he's been the keeper of the list.
Okay. All right. Are there others? Nello and Dan, Dan Grossman, Marana, you guys are on. Did you have any comments or ADOT?
No, I did not.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we were working with Heidi, but it seems like she had sent over some changes in the past couple weeks to reflect what your master plan is showing. So I think we reflected all those changes.
Hey, Jeanette, this is Jonathan.
Oh, sorry. I just want to say Sarita doesn't have any questions or comments.
All right, thanks, Nalo.
Thank you.
Jonathan, was that you I heard?
Yeah, it's me. So one question we had about let's see, hang on a sec. If a project's already sort of in construction, does it need to be in this RMAP list? And I'm thinking of Sunset Road in particular. We're already well into construction on that project, and it's got 42.5 listed, and I'm thinking that number can be a lot smaller. And I'm wondering if that's true for any project that's under construction.
Yes, certainly we can change the costs in this in-plan list to reflect just what's remaining that hasn't been covered, but definitely it should cover at least what's in the tip. So yeah, if there's any changes of cost estimates, as we've been asking for the past month, if you guys have any changes to those, let us know. I know we did receive updated estimates from ADOT and I believe a few of the other jurisdictions as well. But yeah, we want to kind of wrap that up. But if there's capacity there in those projects, do let us know.
So it would be anything in the tip that is at or after fiscal 25. Is that correct?
25. Well, it would be whatever. Yes. So whatever is
Because your
after
RMAP
this
starts in fiscal 25.
25. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I don't think that number needs to be 42.5. But we haven't looked specifically to say exactly what that number should be. But there's
Okay.
probably, $30 million of savings there as well.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, just make sure whatever you do, you don't cut yourself too short.
Right, totally. We don't want to do that. But I think most of the investment's already been programmed in previous fiscal years.
Okay.
I think there's a repeat. So you have both, let's see, 234.08 in the multiple and 7.23 are essentially the same. So I think there's $65 million of savings there. I would recommend keeping 234.08 and keeping the higher allocation of 80 million.
Yeah, I thought we
Taking
pulled
that
out
65 million.
7.23. Hannah, did 7.23 get pulled out, or did it? That was one that I think we emailed with you, Jonathan, last week, and Patrick, to combine, because I think one was a city and one was a county.
I think they're both multiple and they're traffic signals.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
one.
so 7.23 did get retained. So we can
We'll pull that
clean
one
that
out.
up. Yeah.
So I would say the previous one, which is 234.08, put the higher amount on that, put 80 on that, and then take the 65 and put it back in the pool.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, I kind of question the way in which contingency is being used. I've never really seen that before. I kind of looked into ADOT's long-range transportation plan. Essentially, the reasonably anticipated revenues and the project cost estimates aim for the most fiscally sound approach for how much money do we have and what do we expect to have to pay for project delivery. But the inclusion of contingency and booking, $100 to $200 million of funds that could be used for other projects in the plan, I'm not sure that that's the right approach. It's not really the fiscal constraint ultimately happens when you're programming the funding, when you get closer to the actual project costs and you're putting funding into the tip. So I'm having a hard time following the value of the contingency line item when there should be, all of that should be built into the project cost estimates already. And that's the way that ADOT and others have done it.
Yeah, that's a good comment, Paul. I don't know if anyone else had any thoughts on that.
I would just say I agree with the county's position. I don't think it's a fiscally constrained document. I know it is, but not in the same way. It's not a commitment in the same way like the TIP or the RTA is. So if projects are overrunning a little bit, it's not going to have the same consequences, and it doesn't really necessarily serve the purposes of the long range plan.
Okay. So we'll just note the recommendation to remove it unless anybody else has a thought. All righty. Jonathan, it looks like you have your hand up again.
Yeah, another project we noticed that made it to the reserve list was 14203 traffic data collection, and we wondered whether or not that makes sense and if that would prevent us from conducting traffic counts here in the future.
Yeah, we can go back and research where that move came from. Gosh, I remember having a conversation on this one project uh months back at this group, but I can't pinpoint the note behind it. Hannah, do you recall?
I'm sorry, what was the project number again?
14203. It's on the reserve list.
Oh, sorry. Let me, yeah, that one I can't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to look into it.
Yeah, I think what, Jonathan and I have talked about is to ensure that we can maintain the flexibility for these kind of investments in the case that we need to be able to point to a project in the long range plan in order to program funding onto any such project. Another example is the fiber installation and communication upgrades in the ITS project that is also in reserve. We know those investments are going to happen, and we want to just make sure that that's not limited because it's not explicitly in the listing for the long range plan. So those are kind of two examples that we saw as we looked briefly at the proposed reserve list.
Okay, yeah, we'll dive back into our notes and take a look, and um we'll let you know, but we'll also see if there's a spot to make sure that those items could be covered in a
It
different.
might be a change of description into your, traffic signal multimodal description project to allow for, investments in traffic signal stuff and communications to support traffic operations or what have you.
Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely dig into that after this call, Paul, because I'm pretty sure Hannah and I found a spot for that stuff, but we'll double check.
There's a couple of studies projects. One is multiple and one is PAG. And we were kind of wondering whether those can and should be consolidated to allow for transportation studies to happen both inside and outside of PAG, but just have one line item, and maybe there's potential savings there. So it's 659.03 is $30 million for region-wide studies to improve transportation network. And then there's a PAG transportation planning and studies line item later on. So it might be best to, take that $30 million savings, put that in the pool, and then make the PAG one a multiple to allow for both PAG and region-wide transportation studies for multiple sponsors to be pursued. I'm not sure that we need both, I guess.
Okay. And I just hit the Explorer real quick, and it looks like ITS region wide is still in planned under 23008. Hannah, I don't know if you can just search your spreadsheet real quick.
You said 230.
Yeah, 230.08. Okay, well, we'll take a look.
Let me double check the Explorer.
It could be reading my mini screen wrong.
That's currently on the reserve.
Yeah,
that
was the proposed reserve.
Oh, that one's on the reserve. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I see there's one for 2818 that's on the reserve as well. That's also fiber. So, okay, we'll take a look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the flexibility for that investment that we know is going to happen.
All right. Natalie, looks like your hand's up.
Yeah, I just noticed in the reserve list that you still have 23.98 air monitoring and data collection. I think I said previously that that can be removed completely. Those funds are not transportation dollars. They come to the department.
Perfect.
EPA, a different route, so you can remove that
we can
completely.
just.
All right.
Yeah, we'll delete it off there. Thank you.
I think so, Emily.
All right. So obviously this isn't the end of the discussion on the project list. We do plan on presenting the project list to TPC next week. So hopefully we can address all of the comments and questions that you guys have today. And as you continue to look through the list, I'm sure you guys will continue to look through it before next Wednesday. So if you have any other questions, comments, suggestions, please reach out to Hannah or myself, call us. We are dedicating most of our week to getting these items ready for TPC. So we definitely want you guys to continue to be part of that conversation. I know some of the folks on this call are the TPC reps and some of you are not. So we ask that if you are not the TPC rep, that you have some conversations with your TPC rep ahead of time. They'll have all the packet items, but these conversations that we've had, either one-on-one with you or here at the working group, please brief them as time allows and make sure that they have the opportunity to ask some questions as well. That will certainly help facilitate the discussion on Wednesday. We have that agenda has a lot of other items other than RMAP. So, whatever we can do to help answer questions and prepare ahead of time. We have Paul and Jonathan with their hands up. So, Pima County, take it away. Whoever wants to go first.
Hannah, can you send out the updated PDF list with your highlighted blue cells? I think that'll be a really helpful way for us to kind of prepare our TPC reps in terms of what the forthcoming adjustments are with the new fiscal constraint.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Did Paul cover what you wanted to say, Jonathan? All right. Good work, Paul. Representing well. All right, Hannah, did you have any other things on the project list?
No, nothing else, I don't think. Again, the other two lists that were sent out were the reserve and the aviation. So if anything comes up on those, or notice anything, let us know. Yeah, I just want to thank you all for your time and your continued communication.
Yeah. If anyone has any parting thoughts or comments or questions, we're here to answer those. If not, we will see some of you next week and talk to a few of you this week as well.
I'll say thank you all. Good meeting. Thanks for the opportunity for kind of this more in-depth discussion. So great job.
Thanks, Patrick. And Hannah and I will reach out to you guys and set something up for later this week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.